I'll get to know most of your names, I think, by the end of the day. I appreciate you coming here. I appreciate your support for this this endeavor. I think that Holly deserves a round of applause with all of the volunteers for their compassion, for I'm a great fan of thoroughbreds. I think that they're extraordinary creatures. I think that they've been given second-class citizenship over the past couple of decades, and I'm on a mission to turn that around, or at least to do my part to try to turn it around. So I'd like to introduce my lovely wife, Kelly, who will help everybody change their phones, which is an important thing, not just for what we're going to do today, but for your own health and well-being. Because you want them on either on night shift or on a blue light filter. And if you all would figure out how to do that with Kelly's help, I would be great. So there are a couple of things I'd like to chat a little bit first. There's an article that I wrote that Holly kindly printed out that's on the table there, which will give you some background information. Maybe we just pass one of those out. She put it on the Facebook post, so it's available online. But, you already got it. Okay. So if you had a chance to read that, maybe that'll give you a little insight as to what we're going to talk about. There's a lot of science behind what I'm going to talk about today, but I'm going to try to give it a pretty short shrift. I'm happy to answer all questions about science, perhaps at the end, or if you just don't want to get bogged down with it. But there's a lot of science behind this, and I'm going to suggest that in the manner of science, it's possible to suggest that there are two different paths to science, and one would be the Newtonian path, and the other one could be called the Goethean or the Jane Goodall path to science. So let me just distinguish between the two. The Newtonian approach to science is, if you're studying a plant, to pick the plant, take it into the lab, dissect it, and try to figure out everything that you can learn about it in a laboratory setting. The Jane Goodall approach, obviously, is if you want to learn about chimps, and then you go to where the chimps are and you watch them in their environment, and that is your basis of study. I subscribe to that school of thought. So all of the science that's behind everything that we've done here has been from our effort to be very careful observers of horses, to have very specific control over all of the variables in their lives, and then to be able to make thousands of experiments and watch them react and learn from them what they need from us. So that's been our approach, and all of the work that we've done in this manner has taken upwards of 28 years. So this is a long-term, thoroughly investigated, very diligently approached effort on our part. So I'm going to first say that I think that when it comes to the specific area of study that we're going to talk about today, which is thoroughbreds in particular, and saddles primarily, that in my way of thinking, we can, we should, we must do better than what we've done up to this point. The saddle, in particular, is probably the least investigated, least studied, least understood piece of equipment that exists in the equestrian world. It's, and I'm happy to get into that more, but I would say categorically that I believe that saddles have devolved over many decades as opposed to having evolved, even though there's a lot of gimmickry and pseudoscience, with a lot of the inventions of the past 5 years, I think that it's, I think I can make a very good case for them having devolved. So I'd like to talk about the saddles first from the standpoint of biomechanics, because the way I've come to think about saddles is this way. The horse is a very sophisticated engineering system, really. If you take the horse's spinal column in particular, and then you look at just the nature of the vertebrae, and then you attach all of the ligaments and all of the tendons and all of the muscles and everything. It's extraordinarily complicated, and we know this because, one way that we know this is because no one has ever been able to build a mechanical or robotic horse that looks and moves anything like a real horse. It's just never happened. So that tends to indicate that it's complicated. The human, similarly, is a very complicated engineering system for exactly the same reasons, and no one has created a human robot that can walk, dance, or do any of the extraordinary things that the human body can do. So these two complicated engineering systems are interfacing through the saddle, which I think is extraordinarily rudimentary in its basic concept and design, and it has not evolved in that way. And I'll just give you two quick examples of that. This is a saddle tree from the 1940s, and this is a saddle tree from 2020. And no one can tell me, honestly, that represents a lot of technological evolution. Right? So what happens when you put a complicated engineering system on one side of a rudimentary interface and a complicated engineering system on the other side? You get a degradation of both, right? And that's just, you can call that engineering, you can call it physics, you can call it whatever you want. But the reality is that from the standpoint of the horse does not interpret or separate rider from saddle. The horse just has an experience, and that experience is degraded because of the rudimentary nature of the saddle. Does that mean that people haven't done extraordinary things with horses? Absolutely not. I've won a gold medal on a rudimentary piece of equipment. It's certainly possible. The problem is not that we haven't been able to succeed with them. The problem is that for every horse that has succeeded, there are thousands that have not been able to succeed up to their potential because of the fact that it's been too rudimentary and they haven't been able to cope with it. It's been for those horses either uncomfortable, extraordinarily uncomfortable, extraordinarily painful, and it's gone beyond their capacity to cope, and therefore they have either coped in a very unusual way or they haven't coped at all. And I think that we can do better. So one of the principal focus of our effort has been to examine the saddle, the structure of the saddle in particular, the saddle tree in the back, and try to listen to what horses are telling us through literally thousands of experiments, and we have evolved our way over many years to something that is, I think, much more up to the task than what we're currently using. And I would say that there are four pillars of that I'd like to address quickly, and then I'll try to get to the fourth one through some other way. The first one is that the saddle needs to be ergonomic. Now that sounds totally obvious, but if you look at that structure and you think about ergonomics, there is nothing about that shape that looks like a horse's back. Simply put, there are no straight lines and right angles in a horse's back. So you have to have a structure that's ergonomic. That begs the next question. Well, every horse's back is different. How do you arrive at an ergonomic shape? This is where we have a principal departure from the current narrative of saddles today. We believe, I believe, and I believe this through all of the work that we've done, that while all horses in a static state when they're standing still, you pull them out on the cross tie, while they all look different, all horses that are going well, by our definition of going well, all have much more in common in the posture of their back and their movement than we have either thought about or that we have considered in a meaningful way. So what I believe is that if you build and engineer a saddle that takes into account the shape of horses when they're going well as opposed to when they're standing still, you can build one shape or one close to one shape that will accommodate many, many, many horses because of this commonality in the shape of them when they are going well. And in fact, I think that you can create an inducement for horses to go well because they're invited to fill up a shape that actually corresponds to them in the posture of going well. Does that make sense to everyone? That's a very different way of approaching saddle fit, because right at the moment, the current narrative is every horse needs something different, and we need to pull the horse out in a static mode, figure out where there are deficits of contact or there's deficiencies of contact between the horse's back and the saddle, and fill or take away stuff in order to have something that's more uniform in its connection, and that represents the best we can do, and I just don't believe that. If it were true, we would have no horses or very few horses with back pain. The reality is we have more horses with back pain now than that narrative suggests it should take care of, right? So I believe that therefore there's an opening for a different way of thinking, a different concept. And that's the narrative that I'm proposing, and hopefully I'll be able to show that today. So the first idea, these four pillars of saddle, the first idea is having something that's ergonomic, that's built around the shape, particularly with tree and panels, built around the shape that they should be in when they're going well. The second is to have a specificity or a degree of or capacity of the saddle to correspond with the movement of the horse's back and the movement of the rider's seat. So let me get into that for a little bit. Anybody who's watched a video from above and behind a horse when they're moving, there's some good ones online of horses being jogged on a treadmill with a camera above. We've done our own little bits with that on our website. The movement is complicated. You've got one kind of movement through the shoulders. You've got another kind of sinus. The movement through the shoulders is front to back in an alternating fashion. The movement through the middle of the horse's back has a sinusoidal wave going this way and some up and down motion. And obviously the movement of the hips is piston-like. So coming up with something that's engineered to correspond to all of that motion and transition from one to the other is complicated. And that's one of the things that I think we have been able to accomplish again through thousands of iterative developments. But that the normal saddle tree, as you can see in that configuration, has no capacity for accurate correspondence. Why is that important? Every time a horse takes a step, if there is something that creates a pang or a jab or a little discomfort somewhere. It's like having a pebble in your shoe. It's not rocket science. And over the period of one ride, if you think about how many strides you take, and over a period of a horse's lifetime, you think about how many strides the horse is taking every time he's getting a little jab or a little poke or a little prod, that has a degrading effect on his physical ability, and it has, in many cases, a degrading effect on his mentality, because horses, when they experience pain, close off their capacity to think and relate and really understand. So they get a well, I would say in many cases a brain freeze that just doesn't allow them to learn. So what's the answer? The answer for many saddle manufacturers to make a tree that is noodly, I'm going to describe it. It just has all kinds of flex, or to go with a treeless saddle. And I think that both of those are incorrect correspondence to what's actually necessary. I think that the way I've come to think about it is, if you think about the seat of a very good rider, it gives you a clue as to how the saddle really needs to flex. And the way I would say it is, if you watch a very good rider, they sit remarkably still. It's very movement, but obviously they're moving. The movements are very small macro movements and many, many very small micro movements, which allow them, with a great deal of tone, to sit in a beautiful posture on the back of something that's moving. That is the manner in which I believe a saddle tree needs to flex, with a great deal of specificity, a lot of tone, and very, very small micro and very small macro movements that allow this correspondence between a moving horse and a rider's seat. If the tree moves like that, then I think we're much closer to the kind of complexity that we need to have this very good arrangement between horse and rider. I won't get into all of the different ways in which our saddle tree, the way we've achieved that. I'm happy to talk about that at any point, but it's been a slog, and what I would say is that in order to achieve all of the things that we've talked about, we have made upwards of 4,500 experiments, which amount to an experiment every other day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for about 28 years.
It's been heroic, but you don't want to go through it.
If I had known this would be what it was going to be, I would not have started on with that. Anyway, so that's the second pillar. We call it flex modulus. The third pillar, what I would say, is durability. And what I mean by that is, you want something, anybody who's spent time in saddles recognize that new saddles are horrible, because they need to be sort of forced into some sort of conformity. You know, you can imagine if you were riding in that thing, it would take some period of time to bend it to your will and to the will of the horse, during which time the horse is going to be suffering because of the need to bend it. And then it's going to hit a little sweet spot, and then it's going to go beyond that sweet spot and die. And so one of the things that we've worked very hard on, which is why we use carbon fiber, is that we want something to flex day one the same way it's going to flex on day 5,000, and that's very important. So that's the third pillar. And I would say the last pillar is a pillar that we have only come to know in the past 5 years, and we're still in the nascent stages of figuring out. But that is I'm going to call it an energy pillar, which is weird and difficult to understand because it's not the realm that most of us work in. But I would characterize it this way: there is no doubt in anyone's mind who spends any time around horses that certain people bring to horses a kind of energy that horses like. You know, that you can go through a list of great riders that just have or people that work with them on the ground that just have a way with horses that causes those horses to be at peace. People have that with animals of all kinds, and people have it. We have a great language of energy that we talk about that we have no definition for. You know, so someone walks into a room and all of a sudden everybody kind of gets quiet, pays attention, and has a good feeling. Well, that person is conveying some kind of good energy. Somebody else walks into the room, they come into the office in the morning, and you can just tell by their vibe that they have bad energy, right? Something's up. You could ask the question this way: if you have a significant person in your life that you want to have a difficult conversation with, do you want to have that difficult conversation with them when they've just come from the office and you've just come from the office, and that's option one? Or option two, would you rather have that conversation walking along the beach barefoot in the early morning or late evening sunshine? It's a no-brainer, right? We have a language, you know, I feel energetic today, I don't feel energetic today. How do we measure that? We don't have a measurement for this concept of energy that we live with on a daily basis. But we all recognize it's there. My point is, there is a phenomena, an energetic phenomena, that actually exists in saddles and all of our equipment and ourselves that has an impact on horses, and we can either cause it to be more of a positive impact or more of a negative impact. So one of the reasons why I asked you to change your phones is because the blue light setting on your phone when it's in normal daylight mode is a negative influence on the spectrum of what horses want. And if you think about it another way, think about the electrification of the world that we live in over the past 20 years and compare it to 50 years ago, 100 years ago. It's extraordinary. And if you don't think that has an impact on people, just do some research on the negative consequences of our society today, the fact that there are more people suffering from more illnesses, even though we're in an advanced medical, technological world. On the same hand, the horses have not evolved to have a mechanism to handle all of the non-native EMF and blue light phenomena that we expose them to, and I believe that it has a problematic effect. So those are the four areas of work that we've focused on, and what I'd like to do is use some of the horses today to see if we can get all of those four areas to the best, sort of the best mode we can get them in, and then to see what happens with them relative. I don't have a baseline, but I think everyone here, or many of you, might have a baseline of how these horses normally react, and we'll see. What's that?
Can you do a quick demo with this young man? His name is Tyler.
I can do a quick demo with this young man.
I volunteered you, Tyler.
I'm trying not, because my wife was just crossing me about this, I'm trying not to get too deep into the weeds on any of this, but I'll just show you a little.
So the part that Chad kind of is glossed over is toward the end of a lot of, or more recently in his research and development, the horses started exhibiting a lot of behaviors that showed relaxation and even inflammation going away, and we couldn't figure out what on earth was going on. It was from the saddle just being on them, and which is what led to the Thera-Tree, because the saddle had this therapeutic factor to it. And he started looking at all the things that were affecting the electromagnetic field that was coming from the saddle, from the process that he uses with the carbon fiber and the materials and so forth, that he's not going to go all into today. But it was undeniable that it was having this incredible effect, and that things either made it stronger or made it weaker. And so that's how we learned about like the blue light in the phones, or even fluorescent lights. We can flip these lights off and on and show some things. So Tyler's gonna demonstrate a little bit what happens.
Right, so I won't get into the weeds on this, but the question, just to sort of summarize what Kelly was saying, the question really has been for this whole time, how good can a saddle be? And so the first thing is to take it from a piece of equipment that has negative consequences to maybe the best we could do would be to have a saddle that has no negatives. That might be the very best we can do. But actually what we've come to believe is that the saddle can go beyond having no negative, and it can actually have very positive effects. And we have reason to believe that the technology in the saddle is not only good for horses and therapeutic for horses, but it's also therapeutic for riders. And it works, and I won't get into the science, but it works basically on energy, an energy field affecting the biological availability of water. And that's the principle, and I won't say any more about it right now, but there's a lot of science there. So I'm just gonna show you what this young man who has no reason to believe otherwise is gonna turn around and face me. And I'm gonna see Tyler, right? I'm gonna see if you can stand on one foot. Can you do that? Good. Can you put that behind your, like that? Good. Can you take your right hand, put it across your chest like that? Your other right. Very good. That's good. And put this arm straight out to the side. Okay. Got it? Can you stay there right like that? I won't leave you there for hours. Now here's this, I'm gonna put my hand here, and you're gonna keep your arms straight, just like this, and I'm gonna start pushing down, right? And you're gonna work like crazy to keep your arms straight, and soon I'm gonna push you over. You won't fall down on the concrete, but you'll lose your balance. But you're gonna try not to, okay? Ready? I'll push down, and there you go. Is that the best you can do? Think you can do better? Okay, do it one more time again. You're gonna try to keep that arm straight. This is a kinesthetic muscle test, right? So I'm gonna push down, and there you go. That's the best that you can do? For sure. Okay. So now you're gonna do the same thing again. Stand here, right? Stand on one foot, same. Yeah, face me though. Yeah, fix your foot straight. Yeah, you can put your foot down and get straight first. There you go. Okay? Now I'm gonna put this underneath your arm, and you're gonna hold it like that. Okay? Ready? Now I'm gonna do the same thing. I'll put my hand here, and you're gonna keep your arm straight. I'm gonna push down, push down, push down. Why can't I push you over? Magic, huh? Right? Now we take that away. One more time. Pretty big difference, isn't it? Right? So there's something about that makes you like super strong.
It's magic.
Right? You want that.
So,
I want that one.
Now we're gonna do one more test. My coffee, right, has been near that. So let's see if my coffee can do the same thing for you. Okay, I'm gonna put this coffee underneath there. Yeah, you gotta fix your foot there, man, because you've got your foot crooked. Right?
yeah, perfect.
Okay, ready? My hand here. I'm gonna push. For strong coffee, right? Ha, now you know why I drink coffee.
Huh.
Here, hold on.
Kyle, I need one more.
One more.
So this water,
I don't think it's finished. I don't think it's within.
was it over there? No, it's been converted because of the saddle. So, well, let's see, we'll do a little test. So the saddle is sitting over there, you're gonna hold this cup. Hold it like that. The saddle has been over there. Right spin. So, we're gonna try that. Yeah, let's see. You gotta fix your foot now. Straight your foot up. There you go. Your foot wants to face me. Okay. So I'm gonna say this water is gonna be strong. because it's been near the saddle, right? And sure enough it is, right? So if anybody wants to drink good water,
So Tyler, Tyler, you wanna drink that before you stop her?
have a sip of that water now.
That's strong water.
Wait, no, don't go away, don't go away. Have a sip of the water, right? Yeah, drink a little more.
Tell them
That's
about the
good.
water to the water.
That's good.
Put
Yeah, I don't wanna get into the
Starts
weeds
good.
here.
We gotta put this on horses.
Foot straight, get your foot straight.
We can go down this
There you go. All right.
This is not running.
So he's had 2 sips of water, right? Sips of water. Okay, from right here. Can't push the little kid over. Good water, huh? Okay, so all of that's one of 4 tests that we use to discern whether this energy component of the saddle has an impact, so.
Hey Tyler, go drink the rest of that.
Yeah,
Strong
you
all
want that.
day.
Good
Good job. Good job.
Good job, Tyler.
So, the last thing I'd like to say to wrap up is that, we're gonna go through a kind of a protocol that looks a little bit more complicated than what you might be used to as a protocol for getting ready to ride. I'm a believer in engineering success, and I think that all good horsemen engineer their success, and I think that it comes from really being particular about a lot of things, and I think that there are roots in everything that I'm doing that horsemen have used for centuries. So I'm not claiming inventing really anything here. Maybe the inside of the saddle, yes, but many of the other things having to do with the energy component, I'm not inventing, I'm just giving maybe a little bit more definition to and a little bit more understanding to some of the science. So anyway, I think what we'll do is we'll go through a series of courses, and if anybody has a question or two that I can answer briefly now before, well, actually, let's pull out the first course, Holly. And we'll, while the horses are, while we're doing this with horses, I'll be talking more, and then maybe that